Now we're joined by State Representative Gina Hinojosa from Texas. Thank you so much for coming on.
It's my pleasure.
Before we begin, obviously, we're going to focus a lot on SB8 here and the Supreme Court's decision to not block this bill, not block this law out of Texas. So I guess before we start, my first question is there any personal significance in Roe for you?
I think there's personal significance in Roe for all of us, right? Especially women. Um, the day that the bill passed on the floor of the Texas House, I shared my own story with respect to having the right to make decisions over my own body. And about 18 years ago, after I was married, we learned in the second trimester of my pregnancy, a pregnancy that my husband and I very much planned for, very much wanted, that the fetus that I was pregnant with, that she had a condition known as trisomy 18, which doctors said is not compatible with life. It meant that every cell in her body was sick. And so we learned that. I had a week to decide whether or not to abort the pregnancy. I had a week because the laws as they were in the state of Texas would have banned abortion after that point in time, and I would have had to have left the state to get an abortion. So I took the whole week to make that decision. It was very hard. I had members of my own family say to me, members of my own family who were pro-life, right, consider themselves pro-life, say to me, this is different. Um, you know, it's okay to abort this pregnancy. The thing is, Brian, that it's always different when it affects somebody you love. It's
Yeah.
one thing to think about these issues in this kind of policy
Right.
arena, but when it affects somebody you love, it's always different. When it affects you, it's always different. Ultimately made the decision to not terminate the pregnancy, and I went to full term, and she was born shortly after my due date. She died at birth. She didn't make it. But making that decision, and know that I'm Catholic, I made this decision in consultation with my priest. We had heated debates and arguments with a sister at my church. Um, I was angry at God at the time. This was in my life, and if for any woman who has to deal with a decision like this and make this decision, it is probably the biggest decision of your life, but it made me who I am. And in that decision making process, I am a person of faith. I believe I experienced God's grace in a way that if the government had required me to take that pregnancy to birth, go through 12 hours of labor, as is currently the law. Now, with this passage of SB8, a woman who is pregnant with a fetus that is not viable, that will not live, must go through 9 months of pregnancy and deliver that baby that will not live. And that's what I chose to do because of my faith and with family support. But now women will have to do it because the government of Texas is requiring them to do it. It is under the strong arm of the government of Texas. And it is, I think, a violation of our human rights, definitely a violation of our constitutional rights. And it's just a sad, sad day in our country that we've come to this. And many families will be hurt. Many women will be hurt, and already are being hurt by this law.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'm sorry that you had to go through with that. I also think, it's telling that uh, this wasn't just an easy decision like the right makes it out to be, that this is just something that Democrats are doing for fun in their spare time, and just, get pregnant and have an abortion and move on. Like this is like you mentioned, the hardest decision that you'll ever have to make in your entire life, and it's a traumatic decision, and it's heart wrenching, and it will tear people apart from their families and their churches, and there are real people involved in all of this, and I think that's something that's missing, in all the talking points that we're hearing come through.
It's true. And I also want to say, though, that I don't know that I would have made that same decision maybe 5 years later, when I had already had my son, who is now 16 years old, it, my circumstances really, your life circumstances really contribute to decisions you make about this. I would never judge somebody who made a decision to terminate a pregnancy. I don't know what I would have done at any other moment. I just know what I did at that moment. And I would never judge anybody in that terrible circumstance with an impossible choice, really.
Yeah.
And I don't think it is the business of government to be making those judgments and making those determinations.
Well, I think it's important too that you note that as a Democrat, but someone whose personal decision was to keep it and to bring the pregnancy to term, that shows that you can have Democrats who are personally pro-life, who understand the significance of separating their personal politics and their political stances.
Right. And I don't consider myself pro-life. I just consider myself pro not getting into people's personal business. That's
Yeah.
where I stand. That's not the role of government. I'm Mexican Catholic, and in my tradition, in my culture, these are decisions that are made by families. These are decisions that are very personal, and government has no business in the middle of these decisions.
So I want to switch gears over to the legal implications of SB8 and the Supreme Court's decision not to block this law. Now, the Supreme Court ruled not on the merits, but on the procedural thresholds. So what does that mean, and does it mean that this could be resolved in a different way in the future?
Well, yes. And in fact, since that's happened, we now have a state court judge in Austin, Texas, who has put a stay on the effectiveness of this law. Now, we don't know how long that will last. The courts in Texas are all Republican elected when you get past the local level. So that decision will be appealed eventually to the Texas Supreme Court, which is all elected Republicans. We saw when myself and other Democratic members of the Texas House, when we broke quorum and we went to DC, when we brought a lawsuit challenging their ability to arrest us and take us back to the Capitol, a lower decision from an Austin court was immediately overturned by the Texas Supreme Court. So I don't anticipate that stay of the decision will last very long. But yes, to your point about the U.S. Supreme Court, my understanding is they already are considering a law that from another state that would really look at whether Roe v. Wade is still the law of the land. And definitely this could go back up on the merits of the case.
Now, there is a $10,000 bounty for those who aid and abet. This is pretty broadly written. So does that mean that an Uber driver, for example, or a train operator that transports a woman to have an abortion in Texas is then liable?
We don't quite know what that means because this is a new law, right? And there's not much in the legislation that defines what aiding and abetting means in this context. There is a knowing standard. So that would be part of that should be part of the consideration now that the law has taken effect. But right, there's a lot of unanswered questions. This is a very novel way of doing this, allowing private citizens just to sue anybody. And by the way, a private citizen who does this, they can get their attorney's fees paid for, but a defendant, the Uber driver who gets sued and prevails, is not entitled to attorney's fees. So even if it's not proved up, just the mere power of being able to sue somebody
could destroy.
That's right. They'll have to go through all the expenses of defending themselves in court.
Right. And I think the point of that is to just have a chilling effect. And so, and the same goes, with doctors, with anybody transporting, it does put the onus on these people to really try to find out what these women are doing so as to completely insulate themselves from any financial ruin.
That's right. That's right.
Okay, so what about if you fly a woman out of state, for example, to get an abortion in California? I know there are a lot of women, a lot of organizations out here in California, for example, that want to help women in Texas. Are you liable as a California resident? Is Texas going to try to get you extradited to their state?
Again, I don't think it's clear because this is a new law and we don't know how this is going to work. The way I read it, you would be able to, a woman would be able to fly out of the state. And because getting an abortion in another state is not illegal, if it's indeed not, and definitely not illegal under that law, though I don't want to give anybody the impression that I'm saying you are legally out of the woods if you helped a woman in Texas get an abortion. But that is something that I do hope that other people, other organizations look at and evaluate whether that's an option for Texas women.
Well, the scary thing here is that, these laws they're so influenced by Republican ideologues that even what we're talking about right now, like what should be good law, what should be clear based on the text of the legislation, is so clearly just up to the whims of Republican officials who are interpreting these laws. And so at the end of the day, like, you and I could say, okay, well, it says X, Y, and Z here, but then you have these people who just decide what it means in the same way that the Supreme Court has just decided that Roe doesn't count anymore, and then all of a sudden, what's black and white isn't,
That's right. And especially when, again, when it comes to Texas courts, these are elected politicians who are our judges in Texas. And so absolutely politics comes into play in a big way in these decisions.
Now, if the point of this law is to skirt the merits of Roe by instead making it a procedural issue of putting the onus on vigilantes to turn in women who are getting abortions, what's to stop Democrats from doing the same? Why not set up a system where there are $10,000 bounties for anyone who helped a shooter acquire a gun, like hold the gun manufacturer or the retailer responsible for a shooting that occurred? Like, the Supreme Court has already decided that vigilante justice is okay, so why not fight fire with fire here?
Let me say, I think it is a bad idea, just flat out a bad idea, to have to be able to limit someone's constitutional rights by using this vigilante system. And so, we don't do it for guns in Texas. I think we never could because we're Democrats, but at the same time, I don't think it would be a good idea. And then, of course, other states could consider doing that. This is something that will grow and expand. For instance, your Second Amendment question about blue states, definitely, if this vigilante system of justice is allowed to stand in Texas, the tables could be turned. It could be used on Second Amendment rights. It'll grow and expand if it's allowed to be the law in Texas.
Yeah. I don't think anybody has any doubt as to the fact that, when this starts, when you basically give all of Americans a badge to police any and every political hot button issue that they want to, that it won't turn out well for anybody on either side of the political spectrum. I do want to know what the practical effect of this law is going to be. Like, do you honestly think that a rich white woman who needs an abortion isn't going to be able to get one?
No, I don't think that's the case. I think that people of means, women of means, families of means will find ways to do what they need to do for their families, for their own health. And so it is mostly affecting lower wage women and families, and it will be affecting very young women probably as well. It will affect women of color, but I think probably also middle class women. And it places on top of all of it a stigma on these things, even for a wealthy woman, a wealthy family, to know to make her go into the shadows and to make them have to deal with getting this procedure she needs in such a secretive way, to have to leave the state just does damage to a person's mental health, to a person's confidence, and really ultimately to a person's health. When you can't go see your own doctor and you have to travel to get health care to another state, that's just not good for anybody.
Now, if the goal here is to actually stop unwanted pregnancies, why don't Republicans support sex ed? Why don't they support contraception methods? Why don't they support any of these proven means to actually prevent it from getting as far as an abortion in the first place?
That is a great question. That is something that have worked on for several sessions in the Texas legislature. My colleagues have worked on, and it is very, very hard to get support for contraception for women, for more accessible contraception for women. And it makes you wonder whether that is indeed the goal of laws like this, to keep women from, or to keep abortions from happening. What it feels like is it's an attempt to just limit the rights of women, and not help to keep unwanted pregnancies and or from happening, and to keep abortions from happening, but just to make decisions for women and take away our rights and our bodily autonomy.
What's next? What's your message to women and girls in Texas who kind of are in the dark right now, who don't know what to expect moving forward, and what can they expect from state representatives in Texas in terms of getting some relief or help?
What I say to the women of Texas is we will keep fighting this fight in the courts, but it does not look good for us. Certainly does not look good in Texas courts. I really worry about what our ultimate result will be at the U.S. Supreme Court. The best tool, strongest tool we have is to vote. That is the only way we will assure we elect politicians who care about our rights to have control over our bodies and our destinies. And we just need all women, all people, all young people to vote. Roe v. Wade has been the law since the year I was born in 1973. I don't know a reality with that is not the ability to have free control over my reproductive health. And for all those women younger than myself, we're all in that same boat. And if we want to create that reality again, the only way we're going to do it is to vote and elect politicians who respect your right to make decisions about your body and your family. That's it. This is not about whether you believe when that life starts at concept. This is not about your religious beliefs. This is about, will we respect women? Will we give women the same respect, their dignity to make decisions about their lives that we give all other people? That's all this is about. And we need everyone to vote.
Put it perfectly there. So we'll leave it at that. Representative Hinojosa, thank you so much for taking the time to talk. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Brian. I really appreciate you highlighting this issue. We need help in Texas, and we need more attention on this issue.